Hey everyone, it's RushJet1. I actually was looking through a bunch of old files and found these work in progress things from Rikki and Vikki. Thought it'd be fun to go over how some of these are different and kind of a primer for the other Rikki and Vikki video I've been trying to make for a year but kind of miserably failing at. And also for Allah's Legacy, that game that's going to be coming out in a couple months. There's a lot of differences in those tracks, so here's sort of a primer for that because I mean there's some differences here but not as many. Most of them are pretty consistent, like Metal, for instance, sounds very much like how the final one sounds, but it just cuts off after a certain point. And that's sort of how Osman and I were kind of in sync a lot of the time. It's like he would have an idea for the level, and like he'd show me, gameplay from the level, and I'd look at it and go, okay, this kind of music sounds like it would fit, and he would agree. There's a few exceptions to that, and sometimes we kind of chopped up some of the music and made it into multiple tracks. So I'll just show off one of those right now. The Rock Cavern is the first one I want to show, and in the background here I've got the times for the different sections of the song. A, B, and C are all the same as the original song. There's some differences in volumes and little things like that, but there's a D section on the end that is interesting because it actually is the levels 5 through 7, I think, in the game. So I kind of split them into two different tracks because he wanted two different feels for the caves. So, for example, I can pull that up. Point where it loops. So yeah, the original track was a lot longer, and he was like, well, it sounds kind of like, the last section almost is like an add-on, and I kind of wanted a different section in that track, but he's like, just take that and make it into its own separate track. That kind of made sense. So a lot of these are just going to be really simple. Metal is a good example. It just kind of stops after a certain point. not even the response. It just kind of completely cuts off. It's kind of great. Another one is Sand, and I don't really play it because it's almost exactly the same deal where it just kind of goes through the main melody and then stops because I hadn't thought of anything else. I kind of wanted to get these out to Osman and show him, the WIP thought process I was doing. I didn't want to just write an entire track and be like, hope this is good, Never liked doing that. So one that actually is really a big deal or difference is Bubble. So this is actually real quick. This is Playtone. It's the thing that actually does the playing of the audio. Even on the card, apparently, there's a version of this that runs on a CPU that plays back the music. And it's not exactly like this, though. No UI, probably. But yeah, you got all this information here about the registers and the decode and the pan. I actually used this a lot when I was playing, when I was making the soundtrack, because lots of debugging had to go on. I mean, I'd put notes in through my converter and all kinds of crazy nonsense would happen. So I'll make a video about that later, because yeah, it's a really crazy thing that happened where I had to make my own program actually just to run any of these tracks or to create them, I suppose. So here is the second work in progress for Bubble, because the first one is very different. And in case people haven't heard the original, I suppose this is a good example of it. I like how the channel on the left there just like kind of pops into existence after a while. I think it might actually be too loud. Again, that goes down to kind of the debugging aspect of it where something would go wrong. I wouldn't really know why. Oh, look, I wrote some code that was crap, or like Playtone did something really weird and, I exceeded some byte limit, or, I have a command that behaves differently under these certain circumstances. It was kind of crazy. He actually wrote Playtone a couple times at my request, like rest versus frest, like a type of rest that if you use it after specific notes in certain circumstances just does nothing, or it waits instead of resting. So actually I think it was after calls or loops or whatever. But anyway, but yeah, that song is close to the final Bubble. There's some differences. Obviously, it cuts off at a certain point, and there's actually problems with the way I think the melody goes. I think it's a bit different now, but you'll see the original work in progress is extremely different. And the last little bit didn't quite make it in, but the rest of the melody actually was added back into the track. So yeah, I like to reuse as much stuff as I can as long as it seems like it fits. And Osmond thought that was a good idea to kind of combine the two. So let's see, Flame Cavern. I mean, there's not really a lot different here, and I kind of made wave files of some of these because, yeah, there's not a lot of difference except for at the very end. So if you listen through this whole thing, so I'll use illustrious Winamp 2.95 to show. So the whole track is going to be about the same until the loop point, really. So yeah, it just stops at that point. Instead of going to the reiteration with the new harmony in the background and then the new melody at the very end, that just doesn't happen. I just was like, screw it. And it doesn't even really loop, it just stops, because for a long time, looping was a real pain to get working. I had to kind of manually hook it all up. I had not written it into my program at that point, but I eventually figured that one out. So kind of, I mean, it was still pretty buggy, but it worked. But yeah, Osmond thought that it needed a little something at the end of it because the song sounds pretty consistent, and if people are going to be in this area for a really long time, they should at least hear something slightly different. I'm like, okay, so I wrote that little, I think it's 4 bars at the very end of the track. So yeah, I've got the boss music here that I had pulled, but it's really about the same. It just stops before the rising, I guess, build section, and that's about it. So yeah, I guess stay tuned. I'm going to make another video probably in a few days about the different themes that are across these tracks. There's a bunch of different, I guess, leitmotifs that are kind of spread out in this game. The misery theme, you got like the family theme, Rikki and Vikki's themes themselves. Lots of tracks under those, I think 5 or 6 each. And then a couple other ones that are a little more obscure. So I wonder if anyone even caught a couple of them. Anyway, if you like what you're seeing, like and subscribe and ring the bell and all that stuff. This video was sponsored by nobody. Well, me, I guess.